Okay, I'm back with another video about the Albert brothers because I had said in my video that I made yesterday that this isn't just a situation where they've got one kid in the family that's a little bit of a troublemaker. This spreads, like it's the entire family. We could talk about them for hours. And when I posted yesterday's video about Tim Albert getting in that hit and run, somebody said, "Are you sure you're not talking about Chris?" Oh no, Chris has done it too. Let's talk about him today. Now in current time, Chris Albert is a 52-year-old man. He sits on the Canton Select Board, which is almost like a city council, but it is an elected position that he has to be voted into. He is also the owner of a local pizza parlor called D&E Pizza. Okay, that's what he does. He is married to Julie and he is the father of Colin. Okay, now, back when he was 22 years old, so this is 1994, Chris Albert was guilty of vehicular homicide. He was racing down the freeway. He cut across 3 lanes of traffic. He rear-ended a young man named Peter Berger, who was a promising young man, an MBA student from Johnson and Wales. He did have a passenger in his car who survived, but Peter did not. Chris fled the scene and then basically went on the lam. He led police on a 30-hour manhunt. And again, when I said yesterday, when I talked about hit and run, normally, if it's just a regular traffic violation, you pull over, you call the police, and sorry, officer, I fucked up. But when you go on the run, there's usually a pretty good indicator that there's some other reason you're running. There's a bigger reason, there's a bigger thing you're afraid of getting in trouble for. And Chris went on the lam for 30 hours. Now, granted, it was 30 hours later, but when the police finally did find him, he was never given any type of field sobriety or breathalyzer. At that point, it was probably, irrelevant because it had been so long. But he was never even asked by the officers, were you drunk? What was going on? What was your mindset at the time? Never questioned like that. He was brought before a judge named John Dolan, and he was released on a $1,000 bond. In 1995, Chris Albert did plead guilty to vehicular homicide and leaving the scene of an accident. He was given a 2-year sentence, 6 months of which he spent in prison, and then given 2 years of probation. In an interesting twist, in that case, he was represented by a lawyer named John Prescott. He is the brother of Judge Bev. So when we talk about Judge Beverly being connected to the family, her brother represented Chris Albert. Chris kept this hidden when he was running for the Select Council. Another thing he kept hidden, which I think is even more important because he was party to a lawsuit against the Canton PD. So this one's really interesting because this ties back to Officer Lenk. I mentioned yesterday that Officer Lenk is basically like the extra Albert brother. Well, this incident proves it. Remember when I said yesterday, sometimes you're like a hellraiser in high school and then you outgrow it? Well, that incident, the vehicular homicide incident, was when he was 22. Fast forward to now, he's 30. Chris isn't outgrowing it. Chris and Julie, his wife, and I think the brother Tim, so it sounds like all of them, were at a bar called Centerfields, and they were drinking, and as the night went on, they got into a scuffle or some sort of altercation with a fella by the name of Mark Lapalato. Now, it sounds like the Lapalatos are also a pretty big family. There's at least 3 brothers that I know of, Mark, Alfredo, and Chris Lapalato. Anyway, they're all at Centerfields. There's a kerfuffle. The owner of the bar, a man by the name of Mr. Maranthus, he calls the police because he's broken up the fight, but he can't seem to get Mark to leave the property, Mark Lapalato, to leave the property. This was at 9 p.m. The police come, they clear the scene, they kick everybody out of the bar, whatever. Well, then apparently at 12:30, the bar has closed. Maranthus is outside and Lenk is outside the bar. And he has asked Lenk, Officer Lenk, who's off duty, to drive home one of the patrons who'd had too much to drink. That is when, according to one story, Chris and Julie approach. That is Lenk's story, that Chris and Julie walk up to him. Another story is that it was Tim that walked up to them. Either way, somebody, Albert, walked up to Lenk and said, hey, we got in a fight earlier with Mark Lapalato, and now he's coming for us, right? Basically, you see these guys walking up the street and it's Mark Lapalato, and he's gone and gotten his brothers and some friends or whatever, and now they're ready to do rumblefish in the parking lot. Now I'm going to do an entire video about Lenk, but let's just say Lenk, off-duty police officer who has been drinking. They say he's had 4 or 5 beers. He ends up getting in a pretty significant altercation with Mark Lapalato and his brother, Alfredo. So much so, and then the ongoing harassment afterwards, that the Lapalatos end up suing the city of Canton, and they name Chris Albert in this lawsuit. So again, a couple years ago, Chris Albert is running for this city select board, and he doesn't bother to mention that, by the way, he was a party to this lawsuit against the city he wants to represent. His actions have gotten them sued before. May of last year, he then had to send cease and desist letters to several people in a Facebook page. So there was 17 members of his community, his own community, where he's an elected representative, who were talking about his 1995 guilty plea. And he was trying so hard to keep that hidden. He was a little bit insulted that some Facebook followers found out about it. So he had his attorney send cease and desist letters to half this Facebook community because he doesn't want you talking about the shit he did in his past. Now, being part of the Canton Select Board means that Chris has some authority in this town. He gets to help decide who the police chief is, and if that police chief gets contract extensions and pay increases, which is what they've just recently done with Helena Rafferty. He was involved in that decision. At the most recent meeting, he made a formal apology to the city because he's had not one, but two recent altercations in town outside of his business or outside of his role as this selectman. There's actually one video of his wife smacking the shit out of somebody. I think it was Turtle Boy or someone affiliated with him that was in town asking questions and videotaping. And there have been a couple of altercations. So Chris recently had to give an apology. He also had to sit there and listen to the head select board person say that his brother Kevin Albert has now been suspended from the Canton Police Department with pay, but he's been suspended nonetheless while they continue an investigation into him. So yeah, my next video is going to be about Kevin Albert and probably Brian Albert. I think I can fit him into one, but yeah, the shit runs deep in this family.